Termination encouragement. Raise that baby, get better soon. Well, now you've just laid out a basis for a discriminatory reason for that termination, even if that was not your intent. And then requiring proof or evidence. I see this all the time, where you have an employee who is late for work all the time and you're demanding that they prove the basis of why they're late. I have a flat tire, show me a picture of the flat tire. Well, they're just gonna Google a picture of a flat tire. There's a whole bunch of them if you haven't ever tried it. If you're gonna require it for one person, you better be requiring it for every person. So why do I have the big dog, little dog picture on there? Because there was a comedian once who said that comedy only works if you are the little dog picking on the big dog and not the big dog picking on the little dog. It works out that way. Otherwise, it's just undermining people who are already struggling. And so that's an important expectation to have when you're managing your, when you're managing your own policies, processes, and procedures. First and foremost, this needs to start with the hiring process. Insist on a diverse pool. And I know earlier I said that that woman couldn't just do male, female to make things equal and therefore fair. And that's not what I'm saying here. When you say a diverse pool, that means if you're hiring for a law firm and you say, I want only the top 10% of the top 10 law schools in the country, well, let's expand that a little bit, because first of all, I'm going to guess that the people making those recommendations were not themselves the top 10% of the top 10 law schools in the country. And statistically, you know that that is already going to limit your pool to a certain demographic. So insist on a diverse pool. Say, you know, maybe we should be broader than that. Maybe we should just open it up to the top 10% at every law school. Maybe we should look at different criteria. Maybe we should look at people who pull them up from the bootstraps, who had the best improvement in their performance in law school over the course of their time in law school, rather than just riding on their first semester grades. So there's a lot of different ways to increase a diverse pool, but you have to establish those criteria and define what that culture fit is and make sure that you're sticking to it even at the hiring process. And culture fit does not mean, as I saw one company do, that you must enjoy NASCAR, hunting, and fishing in order to be a good fit for their organization. Right? Because what are you doing? You're already eliminating a huge percentage of the population by defining your culture in that way. So know what those personality traits are, know how you're trying to fit people into the organization, and limit your referral hiring. When you are a homogeneous organization and you're only looking for referrals, guess what you're going to get? You're going to get more of what you already have. Statistically, that is true. But the most helpful thing you can do is structure your interviews so that you have skills-based questions. And let me give you an example of that. If you ask someone how they are at Excel, let's be honest. First of all, none of us really know how to use more than like 10 to 20% of what's in Excel. And we might be really good at that 10 to 20%, but there is truly 80% of that software that none of us have ever figured out how to use. So if you ask someone how they are at Excel and their answer is, oh, I'm great at Excel. Are they, or are they great at the 10% that they know? Versus if you ask another candidate that question, how are you at Excel? And that person says, oh, well, I'm really good at what I know. You're going to view that second answer as less impressive than the first answer, when in fact, the second answer is telling you that I am good at what I know, but I fully respect that there's more for me to learn. And that person may be a preferable fit for your organization because they may know 20% of Excel, but are at least acknowledging that they have room for growth and that there's more to the program than they use. So rather than asking the question that way, give them a problem. Say, here are 5 spreadsheets and I need to isolate the recurring criteria of X. How would you go about doing that? If the first person can only alphabetize it and the other person's doing VLOOKUPs, then you've already answered your question, but you've answered it with actual skills. Okay, and in some ways, in doing some of these processes, it is very helpful if you have an HR department who can go through and give some anonymity to those applications. So even if that's just physically cutting off the top of it so that you're not looking at names, or whiting out the college's names so that you're just showing graduation years that they have that requirement, let someone else call the herd so that you're rating your candidates on those objective criteria and that you're defining what those are clearly. So once you have them into your organization, you also then have to set the expectations. You have to set the tone for your office, and you have to help others in your office do that as well. So statistically, women are more likely to raise their hand to do office housekeeping, you know, unload the dishwasher in the break room, wipe down the counters, get the cake for the birthday party, plan the luncheon that we're going to bring in, clean up afterwards, cut the cake, all of those jobs. There is nothing innate about being female that makes someone more capable for doing that. It is always my pet peeve when I travel for work, particularly when my children are young. My children are a year and a half apart, so they're currently 8 and 6. But when they were younger, I would travel a great deal for work. And I would be at a business dinner, and the men would look at me and say, and the women would do it too, who are taking care of your children? Their father, who has the exact same amount of parenting experience that I do, no matter how you measure it, from conception to birth to current. I mean, we're in it together. There was no handbook that I got that he didn't get. So those expectations come from the expectation that the moms take care of the babies. And oh my gosh, he must be amazing that he takes care of his kids. Is he, or is he just doing exactly what I'm doing? So manage those tedious tasks. Set up a chore chart. If the break room is always a disaster in every office because it belongs to everyone and yet no one, then set up a chore chart and make it everyone's responsibility to be in charge of cleaning the break room so that you have some consistency. And then the reverse goes for high profile projects. Don't let the one person in the room who's the loudest always get to do the high profile project. Set up a schedule and track it and make sure that you are consistent in how those projects are being distributed and administered. Same thing goes when you're in meetings and you have meetings where people are man-interrupting and bro-creating and wipe-eating. All of those things happen, and we've all seen them happen. I had an assignment editor when I was a journalist who I would say a story idea, I would pitch a story idea, and she would ignore me. And it got to be a running joke that my male colleagues would then repeat verbatim my same story idea, and to a T every time she would say, well, that's a great idea. And it was a running joke among every reporter in the office because it happened all the time. But when you see it, you need to be able to call it out. And that's what I would train my staff to do as well, is that when they would say things like, well, she can't make that job, she has kids, you don't have to say, excuse me, I believe you're violating her rights under Title VI. No, all you have to say is, did she say that? Was that her availability, or is that something that you're deciding, right? Just call people on it and call them on it gently so that they realize that they're doing it when they're doing it. And then the other side of that is ask people to weigh in. Just because the person is quiet in the meeting doesn't mean that they don't have something to contribute. In fact, they may be your most insightful person because they're actually listening and not getting ready for what they're going to say next. So make sure that everyone at your meetings has been heard. Make sure that you are asking for those people who don't necessarily take that step forward. Make sure you get their insights as well. And this is incredibly important. There are studies that show that when they have observers observing an elementary classroom and they change what the teacher does, because statistically teachers call on male children way more often than they call on female children. So when they changed it and had the teachers call on female and male children equally, the observers consistently said that the teacher was favoring the female students. Because again, it breaks the norm of what those interactions look like and what people are used to seeing, whether or not their brains acknowledge it. So also to that side, equalize availability. I have heard more than one CEO say, well, I'm not going to have one-on-one dinners with any of my female direct reports anymore because, you know, hashtag me too. Well, that's not fair because unless you're then not having dinners with any of your direct reports, one-on-one dinners, then what you've done is that you've given your male direct reports more access to you. Or if you're having only meetings at getting your nails done for manicures, or you're only having meetings done on a golf course or at a race car event or whatever you're doing, whatever that standard is, you need to make sure it's equal to everyone on your team so that everyone feels comfortable being involved and that everyone knows that they have the same access to their managers. So what have we talked about? We talked about what bias is, right? Bias is that inherent preference for one thing over another thing. Now, does being biased make you a terrible human? Nope, makes you a human. That's just how we do it. How can you recognize it? Call yourself out on it. Have your spouse call you out on it. Have your coworkers call you out on it. Make sure that you see when you're doing it. And if you can't recognize it, then I'm happy to help you. And then where does it come from? It doesn't make you a bad person. It's what our cultural norms have dictated. And those cultural norms are shifting. And so the more that we can recognize that we're seeing it, what it is, and where it's originating from, the better we can be at making sure that we are actually combating it. And how do you combat it? Is there a magic answer? There is. It's consistency. Consistency is the key. And I know that sounds so simple. And yet, you know, consistency is the key also in weight loss and training and health. If it were so, it's not that it's hard to go to the gym, it's just really easy not to. It's not that it's hard to do any of these things, it's just really easy not to. And how do I know that consistency is the magic answer? Because, yep, that's me. Back in 1995, I had the honor of being chosen to be a participant in the Walt Disney World College program. And let me tell you about that. We are sad that Walt Disney World is closed. And let's be honest, Walt Disney World's rides are not the best among the amusement park, theme park purveyors. They're not. I'll be the first one to tell you that. But you don't go just for the rides, you go for the experience. It's the happiest place on earth. And do you know why it's the happiest place on earth? Because they will fire you if you are not the happiest human on earth when you are on stage. See, to be part of the Walt Disney World College program, I had to write an essay that was longer and more extensive than any of the essays I wrote to actually get into college. After that, when I made it through that process, I had to take it upon myself to go to an on-campus screening process where from that group of people, I was chosen to go through a next more in-depth telephone interview. And then I also had to go through a phone psychological interview where the woman on the phone said to me at the beginning of the interview, I'm going to ask you a series of questions for the next 45 minutes, and I am not allowed to react to any of your responses. And y'all have now sat with me for a minute, so you know I was like, game on. I'm gonna get this woman to giggle. And I did twice. Now in retrospect, I'm fairly sure I also got her fired, but I didn't know that at the time. So after you go through all of those processes and you get invited to come to Orlando to participate in this program, you then go through training at Disney headquarters, and then you have to audition for your actual role. And so surprise, surprise, I got a high spiel role as an attractions hostess at Inside the Magic Special Effects and Production Tour. Hello everyone, my name is Abigail, at the end of the dock is my assistant, and we'd like to welcome you inside the magic to your special effects and production tour. Yep, I can still do it. With a bottle of wine, I can do all of it with blocking. So I did that same presentation the same way every 6 minutes from August till January. I did it so often that at one point I had an out-of-body experience where my mouth was still moving, but I was having an entire internal dialogue that had nothing to do with what my mouth was doing, and I did not know if I should try to match up the two or if they would just come together on their own. Why do I tell you all of this? Because Disney, who has the highest standards, and keep in mind I was getting paid $5.85 an hour, and they were taking my rent out of my paycheck before they gave me the remainder. So it was straight up the company store. I'm telling you this because Disney put me through those paces to get there. And do you know what they did after we did all that training on the first day? They locked us in the clubhouse and they said to us, look around because 1/3 of you will be fired before this is over. And they were true to their word. If a guest complains about you, you will be fired. If you are caught taking anything off of premises, you will be fired. If you are rude, you will be fired. Or if you are in dress code violation, you will be fired. There was no stepping stone of discipline. You will be fired because Disney protects its brand fiercely and they are consistent. And the thing that makes Disney different than any other experience is that you have the exact same experience at Disney, whether you are staying at the low-end resorts or whether you are staying at the most luxurious resorts, because they're going to treat every one of their guests the same, because they teach their frontline workers, the $5.85 an hour worker, that people have saved up for years to come there and have this experience, and it is your job to make sure it is a great one. And same thing for your employees. People have worked very hard to get to a position to be hired and are so excited to join your company. So the best thing you can do is show them that appreciation and make sure that everybody has the exact same experience. So we actually finished on time, and I am up for questions. Though I have to find the chat box.
Yeah, so Abigail, thank you so much for that presentation. I'm really glad that you left time for questions, because I think that we will have a few. So the first one is from Tanya, who says, if everyone is protected, then why is it differentiated?
So it's differentiated so that you have a basis on which to establish your claim. So if you are a female employee and you are the only female employee, and it turns out that you're being treated differently because of your protected status, then that is the basis of your claim. So same thing in reverse. If it is all female employees and only a male employee, and the male employee is being treated differently because of that status, then your claim would also exist. The whole point is to make sure that those are not the reasons why things are happening. And you'll see those. And let me just say that it is very rare in my years of doing this that I see people that wake up in the morning and be like, oh, I'm going to stick it to 5'4" white women today, right? Like, that's not generally what happens. What generally happens is that you have a pattern of behavior where people don't even realize that they're treating people differently. There was recently a court case where an executive, female executive, only female executive, after she was let go from the organization, filed because she was tired of being the one who was asked to cut the cake, of being the one who was asked to get the break room ready for the event. None of the other male executives were treated in the same way. And so it's really a protection designed to ensure that these biases are not driving decision making.
Thank you. From Jessica, how can you encourage your employer to move towards an unbiased culture and encourage open and honest conversations about the biases we all have?
So the easiest way to do that is to really, assuming that you have a human resources director, is really to engage your human resources director, because that's what they are there for. They are there to kind of bridge that communication between you and your superiors. Because while speaking up is a protected act, I fully respect that that's a scary thing to do. And that, great, now I get to file a lawsuit, but I'm still unemployed, and there's 33 million people unemployed right now, so maybe I'll just stay quiet and see what I can do and make my escape on my own, right? But use those resources. Many companies have HR directors who are there to bridge that conversation. Find an ally, who, whether that is a counterpart or whether that is someone who's in a supervisory role, and just discuss what you've experienced. And it's, again, it doesn't have to be accusatory. It doesn't have to be, hey, I feel like my rights are violated. It really can just be a, have you ever noticed that every time I pitch something, it doesn't seem to get heard, but if Bob says it, everybody jumps on board? So just ask people to watch and see if it's you, and let them come to their own conclusions. But you always have the right to file an EEO charge, and you always have the right to bring those matters to your employer's attention, so that you can start those conversations about what can you do to help make that better. And having tangible examples is really a lot easier. Like the, Bob always interrupts me, or I never get to finish what I'm saying in a meeting, or those sorts of actual examples, so that people can watch it and see if it's happening or not. And again, very rarely is it intentional. Is it intentional? Yeah, I'm a female attorney in Alabama who's blonde and I look like I'm 12. Yeah, I get it. I get that it can be very intentional. But most of the time, what I see and what rises to the level of litigation, it's not. It's just people not even realizing what they're doing.
Yeah. I heard a speaker not too long ago talking about bringing these kinds of things to the attention of the powers that be, and introducing it in a way that says, not just I'm being talked over, but I want to help you uncover a blind spot you may not realize that you had, so that it's also in a way of improving the company or improving the overall environment, or to say, hey, I think some of our senior leaders may have blind spots that are keeping us from getting the best talent in the house. So that was an interesting way to position it,
Absolutely. And that's also where going through your HR department is very helpful, because they're best positioned to have those sensitive conversations with superiors, because it really depends on what the nature of that relationship is, and who the offending person is in relationship to you.
Sure. Do you feel like there has been less bias in the workplace since movements like Me Too, or are people just more afraid now to hire women or to promote them?
I think that there is a positive impact. I really do. I think that, as to what we were just discussing about, I think people are now more aware of how they interact. When people get scared, they tend to freeze, right? Flight or fright. So the initial response of, I'm just not going to interact with women, I mean, obviously that's not sustainable. They're more than half your workforce. So that's not a sustainable model. And it's when you hear those sorts of things that you do get your HR department involved, and that you call them on it and you say, wow, Bob, how's that going to work if you don't talk to half of your employees, right? So just have to reframe the issues so that people can kind of see it from a different direction and understand what it is that they're talking about. But I think that, you know, women are here and have been here and are going to continue to succeed. They are now more than half of the enrollees in law schools, for example. And so those management decisions are going to keep shifting as women keep making more and more headway into the C-suite.
From Grace, when facilitating discussions with managers about bias, how do you get them to break past the political correct and face the biases that we all have?
So some of those examples that I used in this are good ones. And again, I really think it's important to take the stance that bias doesn't always mean bad. It just is sometimes, right? You can have a bias towards bananas over strawberries. It doesn't make one bad and one good. Sometimes it just is. And again, making it not an accusatory conversation, but rather a discussion of, hey, these are things that I've noticed. And again, using that blind spot reference, is that I'm not accusing you of being racist, sexist, whatever. What I'm saying is that if we want people to participate, that we want to ensure that we are being inclusive. And so using those, again, those concrete examples of, hey, you know, I feel like Jane doesn't get to talk a lot in the meetings. Maybe it would be positive if you specifically called on her and asked for her opinion, because she doesn't seem to be someone who's as forthcoming as some of our other employees, just to kind of sort of break that down so that you then start to see those transitions. But yes, if you walk into your supervisor's office and say, wow, here's 5 racist things you said this week, probably not going to get the response that you're hoping for. But just pointing out, and really you have to find your comfort level in how you do that. A lot of times when we would have these situations arise with our clients, like I talked about early on with the hiring manager hiring male and female based on male and female, a lot of the ways that we would approach that is saying things like, is there a written policy on that? So that you have to get people to actually commit to what they're saying, or to rephrase something offensive that's been said to you in a way that makes the other person want to rephrase what they're saying. And that's really going to depend on your personality and how you engage with others. For me, sarcasm is my go-to. So I will absolutely say to someone, so did you just tell me that you're never going to talk to women again? Because that seems like a bad idea, right? Like, I'll say that, but that may not be an approach that works for you. So it may be an approach of, oh, is that a written policy that we're not having one-on-ones anymore with any of the executive team? So that you're kind of making someone step back and realize what they've said out loud.
What advice would you give to executives who have been, maybe had some traditions of, you know, the men's hunting trip or the executive ski trip, and they honestly just, it would be something where it would be really hard to include the women, or maybe they're going to a golf course where people of color are still not welcome. I mean, those kind of things. How do you coach people through that?
So again, it depends on that relationship, but it's also just an open and honest conversation. Hey, we have noticed while, you know, and I went through this as a young associate, that the getaway retreat for my law firm was at a casino in Mississippi where no one was allowed to bring their spouses because it turned out all the male partners didn't really like their spouses. I'm like, I like my spouse. This would be way more meaningful to me if I could bring him with us so that he could meet the rest of the team. So if you're in a subordinate position, make the best of it. If you're in an executive position, you're perfectly positioned to say, you know, it seems that we're having a drop in attendance because it's only the 4 core people who are attending this event. So maybe it's time to explore some other options. Maybe it's time we look at just a retreat to the woods rather than one where we still offer a golf outing, but we also offer a spa package, or we also offer an environment where we can do some team building activities in a games or competitive spirit. So offer an alternative. Don't just say, that's not working anymore. So as long as you can produce that solution, then it kind of, again, opens that up. And particularly, I have learned in the business sector, if you can give them numbers, if you can show to them, yes, I know that you love that retreat, but let's look at who's attended, and let's look what our return on our investment is. If we're really just playing for 5 guys to go play golf, then maybe that's not the best use of that money. Maybe we can invite a speaker. Maybe we can include spouses. Maybe we can use it as a reward trip for high performers so that we're getting more buy-in to the company and helping to stem the tide of some of our turnover. So turn it around so that it's something that's not just a, hey, you're cutting people out, and having it more of a, here's some other things that we can do.
In hiring, what are some ways to define cultural fit and be broad and inclusive while still ensuring that the team culture is preserved?
Sure. So it's going to depend, again, right? Like lawyer, sorry. It depends is my favorite thing to say. So it's going to depend on your team and your culture. A lot of job ads that I've seen recently say must have a great sense of humor, right? That's a universal cultural fit. If that's something that's important to you, then include it. Put it down as an objective standard. Make sure that it's something that you're marketing towards, that you're reaching out to. And one of the other things too on the, you can still have a cultural fit, but don't tie it to things that are, like I said, like NASCAR and hunting and golfing and things that are very specific, that have a very specific demographic population. Instead, have that cultural fit be on community service, on things that are actually beneficial and productive for your organization. And then make sure that you're reaching out to groups that are not your group. If you're hiring for a law firm and you're only talking to the people that you know, then maybe you go out and you reach the Magic City Bar Association, which is the African American Bar Association. Maybe you go out and find a Hispanic Bar Association and make sure that you're cross-posting your notices and including other avenues where you would not necessarily post. Maybe you reach out to historically Black colleges and universities and make sure that you're on their job boards as well, whereas that may not be an avenue that you've explored in the past. So that cultural fit, don't use it as a crutch to find people who are just like you.
What would you say to people who are fearful? I mean, we touched on this a little bit in the beginning of the Q&A, but who are fearful of retaliation, and particularly employees who are in a small or medium-sized business where it's maybe kind of easy to see who's doing the complaining and, you know, what the motivations might have been, intended or unintended, and where there may or may not be HR present.
Sure. So if there's not HR present, that does get a little bit more complicated in your communications. And there are small offices, and we ran into this all the time. We had branches that only had 3 people in it. So, okay, great, I'm going to use the anonymous reporting line. It's not going to really take a lot to crack the code as to which one of the 3 of us made that phone call, right? You also have to have trust in your organization. I will say this as a lawyer: document what's been going on. Make sure you keep your own notes. Make sure you have your own tracking of what you've reported and when you reported it. Every company has to have a reporting line. Read your handbook and see what that reporting line is. And find your ally. I promise you that at that organization, there is an ally. And if there is not, then that probably is not a good organization for you. So you may have to find an exit. So it really is going to depend on those factors, but you have every legal right to complain, and you have every legal right to bring things to your employer's attention so that they can fix them. How you do it is going to make all the difference in how you get and what sort of response that you get. And again, I do think it's very helpful in the business context to present not only what your concern is, but what your solution is at the same time. I really am concerned that there are no women represented on this committee. Can we look at opening that position up so that we have 2 women on that committee at all times, right? If that's an issue that we're seeing. So give them a a concrete example of where your concerns lie and give them a concrete solution that's going to be easy for them to define. And if they come back to you with a no, that's where you can come back with the, where's our written policy on that, right? Or, well, that's interesting because the handbook says, because companies don't always read their own handbooks because somebody else has written them for them and they just know they're supposed to have them and they'll check it off.
You know, one question that comes up a lot in this conversation is once you've been hired and then you're on that training and development path through the organization, can you talk a little bit about how bias creeps into that as far as who gets assigned the high profile projects and so forth, and what we can do to raise awareness to managers who may be engaging in that kind of behavior?
Sure. Again, your relationship and how you conduct yourself is going to be key on how you move forward in this situation. Also, again, very helpful to have actual written data showing that Bob got the last 4 out of the 5 prime assignments. So it's not just, well, I think Bob gets them more often. No, like I'm showing you that in the last 5 things that you've assigned, they've gone to Bob first. And I would really appreciate being shown the same courtesy and respect that you're showing Bob and having the opportunity to prove myself as well. And by the way, it's Bob's turn to unload the dishwasher, right? So it's making sure that you're coming at it from a business attitude. And I've had those awkward conversations. I was in a very small office where I had a legal assistant who was so far behind on doing my work. And I walked out and she was openly playing solitaire at her desk and no one else but me seemed to care. So I brought it to my managing partner's attention and he literally did like the, oh shucks, girls are fighting. And I came down hard and I said, that is not the issue, and put yourself in my position. And if your assistant were doing that, what would your response be, right? And sometimes you do have to be that direct and call them out. Say, look, I'm just asking for the same opportunities that you are giving other people. And I need to make sure that I'm having those opportunities presented to me as well. And then write down that you had that conversation. And if you have an HR department, copy HR on the fact that you've had that conversation so that you have a record of it.
Great. Well, we are coming up on 11 o'clock, and so I hate to curtail this discussion. It's been fantastic. You have shared so much valuable information with us this morning. So thank you again for volunteering your time. You did include all of your contact information. So to all of our participants out there, Abigail wouldn't have done this if she didn't want you to be able to email her questions or connect with her on LinkedIn. So definitely take advantage of that. And Allie, can you forward the slides, or Abigail? There's one more. I just wanted to call attention to what our next Intentional Tuesday is. It is going to be the feedback factor, and we actually have 3 presenters that are going to be on the call at one time. So they are a team: Gwen Hall, C. Renee Washington, and Tanya Allen. They gave this session at the conference, fantastic session. I sat in on most of it. And if for anybody who might be considering a career pivot or is kind of going through a big transition time, this really is a great session for you. And I know a lot of us are going through some major types of transition as we're trying to figure out where this crisis is going. So we look forward to seeing you if you're able to attend next Tuesday, and please do let us know, speaking of feedback factors, please let us know what you think about this series and if it's been valuable to you. Thanks, everyone.